Hello everyone. CMAT 2024 is going to happen next month in May. Even though the date has not been announced, I'm sure that there are many questions about how you can do well in the exam. So this video is for you. We will talk about the structure of the test. We will also talk about what the test was like last year and of course, what you can do to improve your chances. Let's get started. What we know about the test so far is that it will happen in May, but the date has not yet been given to us. So that is something we still have to wait for. The test, however, will not significantly change in format. It is going to be a 3-hour test, 180 minutes. You will be solving 100 questions and the marking scheme as usual is going to be +4 for every correct answer and -1 for every incorrect answer. Of course, if you do not attempt a question, then you will not get any marks nor will you lose any marks. What is good about the CMAT is that you have the freedom to distribute your time. There is no sectional time limit, nor is there any consideration for sectional cutoffs. And this might in fact be an advantage for a lot of candidates. At the same time, the burden therefore is on you to distribute your time wisely. So we will also talk about our recommendations as to how you can use your time in the test. Now, the test usually has 5 sections and this year will be no different. Each of these sections contains 20 questions as you can see, quantitative techniques and data interpretation together 20, LR or logical reasoning 20, the same for language comprehension otherwise known as verbal ability or English. General awareness has 20 questions and innovation and entrepreneurship, which is a special feature of the CMAT, also has 20 questions. You have the freedom to jump from one question to another. So in case you feel that a question is taking time, you can skip it and then you can come back to it later. Now let's take a look at the QA section, otherwise known as quantitative techniques and data interpretation. So here, if you can see, there was a significant difference between slot 1 and slot 2. In arithmetic, there wasn't any major change in terms of number of questions and it was a fairly dominant section in the exam. But if you look at the remaining, for example, modern math, or even data interpretation, the number of questions did vary from one slot to the other. So that tells us that information for slot 1 may not necessarily be helpful for the slot 2 test takers. Now let's take a look at the topics that were tested. In arithmetic, the usual topics were time, speed, distance, ratio, proportion, profit and loss, simple and compound interest, averages and partnerships. I'm sure that these are topics that all of you have prepared for because you must have taken some of the other entrance tests as well. And in case you feel that some of these topics could do with a little bit of brushing up, please go ahead and do that because as you can see, arithmetic has quite a few questions devoted to it. After that, the next important area, at least last year, was numbers. As you can see, there were either 5 or 4 questions based on properties of numbers. This is an area that a lot of students may not always be comfortable with, so it would be a good idea to maybe take a look at it one more time. Then DI had 5 questions in slot 1 and only 1 in slot 2. So it's difficult to say how it's going to be this year. Please also take a look at geometry, modern math and algebra. There were not too many questions last year. Nevertheless, we can never know how many questions from each of these areas are likely to turn up this year. So let's not be selective. Let's try and cover as many things as we can in the time that we have. If you know for sure that there is a particular area that you are weak at, it may not be a good idea to put in too much focus there, but definitely brush up all the others. Let's talk about the logical reasoning section now. What you should notice here is that questions from verbal reasoning were also included in the LR section rather than the language comprehension section, as you would see in some of the other exams. So in verbal reasoning, there were 8 questions in slot 1 and more or less the same in slot 2. So there wasn't a significant change. And the topics included syllogisms, assertion, reason questions, analogy, strong, weak arguments, implicit assumptions, and so on. These are questions where you will definitely get better with practice. Of course, there are some areas here where even practice may not get you 100% accuracy, but there are others, for example, syllogisms, where you can do really well. So please practice these verbal reasoning questions. The same goes for non-verbal reasoning. Most of these topics should now be familiar to you. And non-verbal reasoning last year was actually more dominant in the LR section. So I'm sure that you have already solved questions related to arrangements, series, calendars, coding, decoding, etc. Nevertheless, the key here is to get faster and better. So please ensure that you are solving questions from all of these areas. And of course, we will tell you where you can get these questions from. Let's now take a look at language comprehension. So the verbal section tends to be one of the more scoring sections, and usually it's also not too much on the difficult side. If you look at the distribution of questions, one of the reasons that you don't necessarily need to spend too much time on this section is that RC is not a big chunk. In slot 1, there were 5 questions, and in slot 2, there were only 4. But the distribution of these questions was significantly different. So if you look at slot 1, there were 3 RC passages, whereas in slot 2, there was only 1. What is noticeable, however, is that the difficulty level did not fundamentally change. In both cases, the questions were fairly easy. So if you have been staying away from RC so far, maybe in the CMAT, you might want to do this. Apart from RC, we have vocabulary, grammar, and a little bit of verbal reasoning included here as well. But I guess there is just lip service to verbal reasoning here because there were only 1 parajumble. So I'm not saying that the pattern is going to be exactly the same, and I'm sure that you have practiced parajumbles and other verbal reasoning questions. Just don't let go of them thinking that they're not likely to appear. Vocabulary and grammar is a pretty big chunk of this section. So it's a good time to start learning that word list and to learn the rules of grammar. The questions are usually related to synonyms and antonyms, word meanings, idioms, foreign phrases, and so on. Now, what you need to understand is that in a lot of cases, the context may give you some clues about the answer. But when it is about synonyms or even antonyms, then you simply need to know the meaning of the word. So please start learning those words. In some cases, you may not know the answer at all, and it wouldn't be very wise to guess because you either know or you don't know. There is no middle path when it comes to vocabulary. When it comes to grammar, sometimes we do use our own internal guide in order to decide whether a sentence is correct or not. But look at the kind of questions that were given. Fill in the blank, sentence correction, active, passive voice. Now, active, passive voice is something that we learn in school, so that should not be too difficult for you. Sentence correction, however, will require you to learn the rules. Fill in the blanks often has to do with usage. It may not test the rules of grammar in a very strict way, but you do need to be able to distinguish between correct and incorrect usage of certain expressions. So, please learn the rules, please learn the words. Now, let's talk about the general awareness section. This is a section that concerns a lot of students because the syllabus is fairly vast and our GK is not exactly the most up-to-date. If you look at slot 1 and slot 2, there wasn't a significant difference in terms of distribution of questions. Static GK was dominant and there were fewer questions on current affairs. The topics that you should have been well versed with would be sports, the constitution, and when I say the constitution, obviously it is the Indian constitution, history, books and authors, geography, law, and more. Current affairs was not really limited to the last year only. And this did make things complicated because most of us don't really look at what happened beyond that previous year. But these are questions that are a little unpredictable and most students would not really do well at answering these questions. So let's not worry about it. Let's talk about what is most likely to be tested, which is the past year. Now, the overall difficulty of the GK section was pretty high. And the reason that it is high is, as I said, the syllabus is fairly vast and no one can cover 100%. So if you got a score of about 25, that led to a percentile of about 90, which is fairly good. So right now, make sure that you go through the CMAT compendium and make sure that you go to the GK zone and study the GK based content. This is not something that you should leave to luck. They're not asking you to answer too many questions, but you do need to answer a few. One thing that I did want to add here is that once the exam is done, the website will have a provisional answer key that is published after a while. During the time that the provisional answer key is displayed, you are allowed to challenge certain questions or answers. Last year, we did challenge a particular question on behalf of the students. This challenge was accepted, and the question would either be awarding full marks to everyone in case there's a technical error, or if the answer is changed, then the students who have answered that question correctly would be given the marks for that question. So this year, if you feel that the answer to a particular question is invalid or there's something wrong with the question itself, please make sure that you point it out to us and we will try to challenge it on your behalf. Of course, you could do it at a personal level as well, at a charge of about rupees 200 per question. So, in case you feel that this is something that you want to do, then you could approach the authorities directly or you could just let us know. Now, this does not apply only to GK, it applies to the other sections as well. So, let's just keep this in mind. Now, let's move on to the last and the most special section of the exam. Special because we don't really see this anywhere else, and special also because this is a section that you can be very well prepared for. Business entrepreneurship concepts were the most dominant in this particular section. There were about 16 to 17 questions based on that only. The topics that you had to be well versed with included business, economics, management, and government schemes. Now, when it comes to questions regarding concepts, for example, the definition of an entrepreneur or an intrapreneur, these are things you can definitely prepare well for. Where students struggled were the questions related to government schemes. So please take a look at that as well in case you have been ignoring this area so far. Now let's take a look at what you can do to score better in this exam. First thing is to ensure that you solve past CMAT papers. If you have not done that yet, it's definitely about time that you do it. You will find these papers on the My IMS website. Go to the resources section and look for past papers. The second thing, of course, is to take the mock tests. So the mock tests will allow you to experiment with your strategy. You will be able to figure out the correct sectional order for you, and you will also learn to manage your time well. So make sure that you're taking mocks at regular intervals. For GK and the innovation and entrepreneurship section, we have provided a lot of resources. There is a CMAT compendium and there are 10 chapters on innovation and entrepreneurship. So please take a look at those because these are areas where you can score well. Deciding the sectional order beforehand is kind of important and it will also help you remain calm during the test. By taking the past papers and by also taking the mock tests, you know what works for you. What we can tell you is how much time to spend on each section. For example, Quant, LR and Verbal may all take somewhere between 45 to 50 minutes. But on GK and innovation and entrepreneurship, you can save time because there isn't really too much data that you need to process there. You will either know the correct answer or you will not know the correct answer. So please make sure that you do not stare at a question hoping that the answer will just appear to you. Be quick and as fast as you can be. Focus on areas that are specific to the CMAT. So we've already shown you what were the topics tested last year in Quant, LR, Verbal. All of these areas have certain topics that have greater weightage in the CMAT as compared to others. So make sure that you brush up these topics and practice them. Stay tuned for more updates on the CMAT. Wish you all the best for the exam.